Chelsea have signed 42 players and Manchester City have only signed one, which means this is going to be a blockbuster because we don't know what's going to happen. Chelsea against City, the biggest game of the weekend, you'd say. 4-4 last season. We got a City fan, we got a Chelsea fan, and I want to start with Kweku. What do you make of this Chelsea side? Do we know who's going to start?
I want to start about this new desk. Look at this.
It's outrageous. It's outrageously beautiful.
Yeah, man. Really up in the settings. This is, like you said, the best game of last season. 4-4. Cole Palmer, of course, scoring for Chelsea at the death late penalty. But this is the Chelsea side that are in a very different place to where they were last year. There's been so much made of Chelsea's transfer policy. A lot of turnover, a lot of players brought in, obviously different manager. We don't know how Maresca will cope at this level. And so for Chelsea, it's unknown. You can't really read too much into pre-season as well. A lot of Chelsea's players were not available. They're at major tournaments. And Maresca couldn't really get his philosophy embedded within the squad because there was players missing through various reasons. And so going into this game against City, you probably asked for a different first game of the season. City are clearly the best team in the country, if not the world. But we're going into this game with confidence because Chelsea played City close 3 times last season. 4-4 draw at Stamford Bridge, a 1-1 draw at the Etihad, and in the FA Cup in the semi-final, Chelsea played City very, very close, unfortunately lost in that game. So I'm going to this game with trepidation, but Chelsea normally rise to the occasion when they play against the bigger sides. It's normally against the sides in mid-table or near the bottom of the table that Chelsea trip up on or falter. So Chelsea against City, going to be a big game. I just expect City to just have a little bit too much.
Previewing games before the season started when a team's had loads of changes is really difficult, but Man City are basically the exact same as they were last year, but with this invisible cloud of people saying they can't do it again. We said this last year, if you remember. I think me and you were sat here going, it's gonna be Arsenal. No, I'm not going to do it this year. But this year, you come in, Savio, the only signing, looked really good actually in the Community Shield.
Yeah, he looked good.
A lot of people saying they might switch it up, like go Doku and Savio both sides, pacey wingers, throwback Pep.
Yeah, look, it's really difficult to speak about anything when you haven't really seen the full team. Of course, City had, I think, the most players at the Euros, so the most players out during pre-season. City did play Chelsea during pre-season. Was a bit of a disaster for you guys. I mean, Robert Sanchez just decided to give us the ball about 3 times, so it wasn't much of a game. But yeah, you just can't back against City, I think, especially like the relentless hunger from Pep Guardiola and his team. 6 titles in 7, 4 in a row. I mean, we mentioned last week, I think one of the question marks around City this year is just, can they do it again? I think the fatigue is going to play a huge part. I mean, we mentioned Rodri as well, who's played the most games, I think, in Europe over the last 3 or 4 seasons. Of course, got to the final of the Euros as well. City, again, haven't bought anyone to back up that position. The Calvin Phillips experiment didn't work. So an injury to him would be really, really detrimental to the side. Same with Erling Haaland, of course, losing Julian Alvarez to Atletico Madrid as well. So there are a lot of question marks, I think, over City this year. I think, as a City fan, I'm going to this year slightly less confident than before.
You said this last year, man. We do this every year.
Yeah, but of course, I said this last year, and that was probably the worst City that we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years. And they haven't added particular strength to the side, so it's going to be really difficult. I think Chelsea away is not a place you want to go, despite the mess that is there, despite the fact they've got a new manager. So I really have no idea how this one's going to go.
I think for City, it's not the case because Pep might sign a contract extension, but he's got a year left in his contract. You look at players like Kevin De Bruyne, who spoke in the summer about maybe wanting to make a move at some point in his career to Saudi Arabia. Ederson was linked with moves to Saudi Arabia. A core of the City squad might not be there next season. And we saw how the narrative kind of toppled Liverpool when Klopp announced he was leaving, and they tried to push that last dance narrative. It didn't really work. But it's a City team that are well drilled. When it gets to the back end of the season, there's never been a team better than City in Premier League history. And so that might be the narrative that pushes them on to win 5 in a row. We thought 4 in a row was impossible. So City are trying to break their own records at this point. And to go again and again and again, you need something to kind of spark that fire. I know we're looking at it from a macro point of view as well. We're here to talk about the Chelsea-City game. But for City, I think that's how they have to look at it, because these games at the beginning of the season, we've seen it with Pep Guardiola, he's working things out. Pre-season's not always where he can get it.
I don't think he's working things out. I think he knows the plan, because in the second half of the season, he flicks a switch. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
and last 16 games, suddenly everything was figured out. You go, it's basically like that he's known that the entire time.
It seems like City under Guardiola kind of work in half seasons, don't they? The first half of the season is who's going to make my 11 for the second half of the season. And that's usually what happens, isn't it? After Christmas, he's pretty much found his 11 with maybe 2 or 3 subs, which he'll make almost religiously at the same point in the same game. And then that's usually how it works. But I think this year is going to be interesting because he found his 11 at the end of last season. Now, is that going to be the same? Is he going to start with that, or is he going to experiment again at the beginning of this season? I'd wager him to experiment. I think the way that Jeremy Doku was last year, I think he's probably going to be starting ahead of Grealish for the majority of games. And then on that right-hand side, as you mentioned, it's Oscar Bob and Savio. They're both very relatively similar sort of style of players in fast, tricky wingers rather than ball retention wingers, which Pep has used in the past. So I think there might be a change in style.
Where does Foden play this season?
Foden plays in the middle. I think Foden. I think you build the team around Foden.
Okay.
I think De Bruyne was unbelievable last year. The amount of assists that he got in half a year after being injured, was incredible. But you just need to look at him and you can use the eye test to see that he can't burst past players anymore. He's just not the same player. And now he's older than he was last year. I don't think you can rely on putting a De Bruyne as one of the main figureheads of the team now.
I'm just asking it from a Chelsea point of view because I feel like that's where Chelsea are going to struggle the most, maybe in this game against City. What pockets does Phil Foden pick up if Phil Foden does start the game? Again, we don't know who's going to start because it is pre-season.
You'd imagine he does start, like as you just said, especially towards the end of last season. Whenever City was struggling, it was Foden. He was shifting around, or he's shifting other players around for Foden. Let's quickly chat about Chelsea because I got an amazing start that I need to read out. Chelsea have now signed 35 players in the Todd Boehly era. If you go back 35 signings for Liverpool, it's Joe Gomez in 2015.
That's where we need to readjust what the narrative around Chelsea. We talk about the Boehly era, and of course, the first season was the Boehly era. He was making those signings. He was the director of football. It's more Egbali pulling the strings, and we've got Winstanley in terms of directors of football who are making these signings for Chelsea. But that is absolutely insane, and you can't run a sustainable football club under that model. We saw earlier today they've given Cole Palmer a contract extension, taking his contract up to 2033. We don't know what we're going to be doing in 2033, let alone a footballer who's almost hitting the peak of his powers. We don't expect him to stay there for the majority of that contract. It's a Chelsea side that are in flux right now and nobody quite knows what they're going to look like. If you ask 100 different Chelsea fans what's your starting 11 for Sunday, you get 100 different answers. And that tells you where you're at. With City, there's maybe 2, 3, 4 variations. With Chelsea, you don't know what the midfield looks like. We know what happened with Enzo Fernandez over the summer. He's going to be the man leading Chelsea out as captain on Sunday. It just tells you where Chelsea are as a football club. Although we've said all of that stuff about Chelsea, I do think that Chelsea are a football team that on their day can pose problems to anybody in the league. We saw it last season. The first game of the season for Chelsea was against Liverpool. Everyone expected Chelsea to get trounced, managed to get a draw in that game. And I think against Man City, Chelsea have just got this weird thing with City over the last couple of years where we can get results. It's about starting well. It's about not conceding the first goal. But Enzo Maresca is a man that was schooled under Pep Guardiola. He's a man that wants to keep the ball, he wants to retain possession, he wants to recycle it, and he wants to get it out to his wide wingers. And I think that's where Chelsea can hurt City. I think Walker's great. I think Guardiola's great, but I think that's where Chelsea can get most of the joy out wide because in the middle, City is so strong.
It does make that interesting because you have Enzo Maresca at Chelsea, and Chelsea notoriously in this fixture would actually sit in and hit City on the counter as they would in most big fixtures. But in this one, unless Enzo Maresca decides to get rid of his principles, which he won't because he spent the entire championship season playing that exact way, he's going to want the ball and Pep's going to want the ball. And this might be a game where you just jostle for possession early in the season. No one wants to you don't want to get battered 4-0. You don't want to lose 1-0. So it makes for quite an interesting tactical battle.
I think it's probably come a little bit too soon for Enzo Maresca, which is why I think that City will probably win the game. I think his style of play is so different from what Pochettino's style of play was, and he is way more into the ball retention, just like Guardiola. And I think that style of football takes a little bit of time to implement, and you're playing against a team who is the best at that. I think in terms of Chelsea overall, I think we have been overwhelmed a little bit by the narrative of Todd Boehly buying all these players, because you look at that summer and you think, okay, any other team in the Premier League buys Pedro Neto and Kiernan Dewsbury Hall, and you say, that's a really good summer. They're 2 really good signings. Then you look at the squad list of players that Chelsea have. That is an exceptional list of players. Yes, there's been a lot of mud and a lot of mess around that group of players and how large it is. But if Maresca can find a squad that he is comfortable with, that can work in his system, the quality of the players is there for Chelsea to succeed. I just think this week is probably a little bit too soon.
I'd have to agree. I think going into this, City come into this knowing that there's still eyes on them. Can they make it 5 out of 5? I do wonder if City might not get as much pressure this season. Like we spoke last week about Arsenal potentially being the favourites. A lot of people I speak to go, Arsenal have to win the league this season. So I do wonder if City actually go, we're not the favourites. We can sort of like relax a little bit.
With greatness comes pressure. City players are great. They're Premier League legends. And we kind of forget that because we're living in the now. There will not be a sense of we've achieved everything. There's no pressure on us. Kevin De Bruyne is going to run.
I wonder if this is the time. Like we felt last season.
I disagree.
Really?
I disagree. I think the driving force last year was to do something that no one has ever done before.
Yeah.
I think the players this year, if they're feeling a little niggle, they might take an extra couple of days out because there's not really any motivation. They've done all they can do. They've won the treble. They've made history by winning 4 in a row, and I'm not sure that there's going to be that impetus to go again when the going gets really tough. Like, of course, they're big winners. We know that.
Yeah.
They're schooled under Pep Guardiola.